During the 1939 to 1945 Nazi occupation of France in World War II, the English and American Air Forces flew many bombing raids over strategic German targets in France. The English bombers flew at night and the American bombers flew during daylight. This video is about one American plane, a B-17 Flying Fortress nicknamed the Battling Bastards by its crew, attached to the 92nd Bomb Group, Alconbury Air Base in England. The B-17 was the U.S. Army Air Force workhorse in Europe during the war. It bristled with machine guns with turrets on top, bottom, front and rear, and on both sides. It also carried a large bomb load and was easy to fly. This story is told by First Lieutenant Gordon Stephenson, the co-pilot of the Battling Bastards. Lieutenant Stephenson is the only member of the 10-man crew still living. He is now 87 years old and resides with his wife in Arkansas, USA. This story is narrated by Lieutenant Stephenson's younger brother, Gordon Stephenson.
Early Sunday morning, July 4th, 1943, our crew was awakened for a mission briefing. July 4th is a USA holiday celebrating the nation's independence, so we did not expect to be called for a bombing mission. During the mission briefing, however, we learned that the target for that day would be the Elquest Aircraft Factory in Nantes, France, and 16 planes of the 92nd Bomb Group, including the Battling Bastards, would be part of the 18-bomber force designated to hit the Nantes target. 2 other bomb groups were assigned to the mission, totaling 160 aircraft with designated targets at Le Mans and La Police. We were informed that we would go without fighter plane cover and could expect heavy flak over the target. The weather was good. Flak was a hot, jagged steel from cannons fired by the German defenses and was the most feared by crews flying over the German targets. Over 1,000 pieces of steel were released from each exploding shell. Our formation took off on July 4th as scheduled at 0947 hours and crossed the French coast at La Ciblie-aux-Lyons, entering enemy territory at 24,000 feet at 1207 hours. German fighters soon attacked the formation from every direction as it approached the Nantes area. Each gun on the Battling Bastards was firing over 100 rounds per minute. The number 3 engine on the right side of the plane was hit and put out of commission, but the pilot continued on towards the target. As we approached the target, the fighters pulled away and the flak began with shells exploding all around us. The plane next to us took a direct hit and was disintegrated in midair. The flak was the worst we had ever encountered. As we started the bombing run over the northeast at 25,000 feet, the controls were turned over to the bombardier. After the bombs were dropped at 12:49 hours, we started our slow turn back to England. It was at this time that we were hit by flak, taking out 2 of the remaining 3 engines and starting to lose altitude fast. By this time, we had fallen out of the formation and left alone with a crippled plane to be taken by the German fighters. The pilot decided he could not make it across the English Channel, so he lowered the plane's wheels, signifying to the fighters that we were going to crash land. Flying parallel to the coast, he decided the best option was along the shore of the Bay of Biscay. He descended rapidly towards the water as the pilot tried to bring the plane to a stall so it would not hit the water nose first. He was pretty successful, but the plane nosed hard into the water several hundred yards offshore of the village of Ligonier on the Isle of Noirmoutier. We were down at 13:10 hours on Sunday, July 4th, 1943. Before we hit the water, a German fighter fired on us, injuring several of the crew. Our ditching of the Battling Bastards saved all 10 men of the crew. We scrambled out of the plane the best we could and into our yellow Mae West life jackets. The pilot and I had been told that if necessary we could escape the plane through small windows next to our seats. It didn't look possible until we had to evacuate the ship. I stepped out onto the wing, dove into the water with the rest of the crew. The Mae West worked to perfection. The German shore batteries laid down a bracket of machine gun fire on each side of us, so we had no choice but to swim to shore. A German fighter plane strafed us in the water, wounding our tail gunner in the leg. The salt water brought my attention to my right leg, where a splinter of shrapnel of flak had lodged. I pulled it out and dropped it in the water. I wish I had kept it as a souvenir. The Germans herded us onto shore where we were taken prisoners. I don't remember much about the area except for a few fishing boats in the water and a few local citizens back from the shore as we were loaded into trucks. At this point, our crew was separated as the Germans were rank conscious. The officers were taken to separate interrogation centers from the enlisted men. We were never to be together again as a group. We were about to enter into a different terror-filled part of the war as prisoners of war for nearly 2 years. But that's another story. It will not be addressed here. So the battling bastards went to a watery grave at the bottom of the Bay of Biscay on July 4th, 1943. Of course, we did not know how deep the water was at the site and never expected to see any evidence of the plane again. The years have passed, but we never forget those experiences and the tragedy of war. Of course, we had no concept at the time of what the French citizens at La Guinière were experiencing under the Nazi occupation for so many years. Then, many years later, I received word that a French doctor, Dr. Louis Giraud, had identified our plane as the one the parts of which appear above the water at low tide. Dr. Giraud leads a group of local French historians who have identified numerous World War II American aircraft crash sites and have documented stories of French citizens hiding airmen that have parachuted in the Vendée region of France. Dr. Giraud has invited several surviving American airmen back to be honored in ceremonies by the French people. He has also been honored in the United States for his efforts as he traveled to California to meet with many of the airmen. Sadly, I was unable to attend the California reunion, and my health does not permit me to travel to France to meet him. But we have corresponded frequently, and I hold much respect for what he has done and what his efforts have meant to enhance the mutual respect of both countries. After receiving word of the location of the battling bastards, I informed my little brother, who visits their son frequently in Holland. So in 2002, my brother and his wife arranged to visit with Dr. Giraud at their home in La Roche-sur-Yon. I will let him tell of their visit with Dr. Giraud. In May of 2002, we were graciously received by Dr. Giraud and his family in their home at La Roche-sur-Yon. Dr. and Mrs. Giraud then drove us to several former World War II American bomber crash sites with monuments placed there by Dr. Giraud's organization. We then traveled to La Guinière to see the site where my brother's plane crashed in the water off the coast of the village. Dr. Giraud informed us that it was a period of high tide and remnants of the plane would not be visible, but he would take us to the beach later to see where the crash occurred. First, however, he had a surprise for us. He introduced us to Ms. Isabelle Palvadeau, who accompanied us as an interpreter, and to Mr. Clement Gorbergeau, a prominent leader in the village. Mr. Gorbergeau was 15 years old at the time of my brother's plane crash, and he described in detail what he saw on Sunday, 59 years previous. Ms. Palvadeau interpreted his description of what happened that day.
Because in our village here, we call him our local historian. And he says that during the war, he was writing like a diary every day. And vous avez toujours écrit?
Plus ou moins, oui.
Yes, he's more or less spent all his life writing about the events in the vicinity.
C'est-à-dire, j'ai tenu ce journal pendant la guerre à partir du 1er janvier 1940. Et après, j'ai continué toute la durée de la guerre.
So he started writing his diary during the Second World War, the 1st of July 1943, and from that day on, he continued writing his diary throughout the war period.
Alors, voyez-vous, ce journal a dormi au grenier jusque en 94 ou 95.
So then he kept this diary slipping in his attic until 1995.
Ensuite, j'en ai parlé devant un ami qui m'a dit « Tu devrais publier tout ce que tu as noté à cette époque. »
And then he talked to a friend, and that friend said to him, "You should publish from the time of the war."
Mais durant toute mon activité professionnelle, je n'ai pas écrit. J'ai repris depuis que je suis en retraite l'histoire de la commune.
And then since he retired, he got interested again in what happens in the history of the local history.
Yes.
Very good.
Very interesting. Yes, it is. Uh-huh.
Definitely.
Alors,
Vous êtes l'ami peut-être qu'il avait dit de publier, non?
comment?
C'est vous l'ami?
Non, c'est pas monsieur.
Pardon,
non.
pardon.
Mais
Non,
par contre,
j'ai-
j'ai eu un exemplaire. J'ai le journal. vous voyez,
Oui,
je l'ai.
non, j'ai connu M. Goulot dans d'autres circonstances à l'occasion de nos recherches communes.
Voilà, c'est ça.
D'accord.
Alors, c'était le
We were then escorted to the home of Mademoiselle Annie Glory, whose home was on the beach in July 1943. She described the events of that Sunday morning as they were interpreted by Palvido. Mademoiselle Glory was returning home from church on July 4th, 1943. As a little 12-year-old girl, she terrified as she heard all the shooting and the large plane crashing just off the shore near her home. She described seeing the plane crash and members of the crew scrambling from the plane, dressed in bright yellow life jackets, swimming away from the plane. She remembered the Germans shooting at some of the men in the water. The men all came to shore, as she described it, as the Germans captured them and placed them in trucks and carried them away.
C'était juste sur le bord.
Okay, so she was, because she was living, as I said,
C'était la
you know,
dernière
on the
maison,
beach.
juste sur le bord.
And she was living on the last in the row of houses, the last house on the row giving onto the beach.
Okay.
And it was just before 12 o'clock. Et vous rentriez de la messe?
Oui, oui,
And they were all coming back home from
Communion.
From communion.
oui.
So there were plenty of people on
Puis,
that day.
il y avait les Allemands qui tiraient là-bas à la pointe
Ouais.
de la Loire, qui
Au
l'ont abattu.
blocos aussi.
Au blocos aussi.
Oui, oui.
oui, oui. Mais nous, ça faisait plus loin, ça portait plus loin, tandis que toi, t'étais en face.
Ah ben oui.
Oui. Alors,
Oui, oui, ça, je les ai entendus parce que...
et ben, moi, j'ai vu l'avion tomber.
So she saw. Alors vous arrivez à la maison.
Oui. Mais il y avait plein de monde partout. On a entendu du bruit, les avions et tout, parce qu'il y en avait d'autres avant qu'on passait.
Ben, il y a
Okay,
eu
so-
le
je crois.
bombardier qui a atterri,
Oui,
puis moi j'ai vu 3 chasseurs qui tournaient autour.
oui, oui, oui.
So they were all coming back home, and they heard this noise, and there were a lot of people because you know this communion day. And et vous avez levé les yeux.
Ben, ça tombait juste en face à ce
Okay, and
moment-là.
at the same time they could hear the noises. The plane crashed.
On a vu tous les hommes qui couraient. Moi, on a dit que c'était qu'ils jetaient les papiers à la mer. On voyait bien qu'ils jetaient plein de choses comme ça.
And then they saw the men from the plane getting out of the plane, and they could see them doing this, like throwing papers
Ouais.
out.
On voyait tous les Allemands qui étaient dans le camp, là,
Oui.
qui allaient
Et ils
sur la
sont même
plage
tirés
en
dessus,
courant.
même.
Oui, oui.
Même
ils ont-
qu'ils se
ils ont
rendaient,
tiré.
les hommes, ils se rendaient, ils avaient les bras en l'air, mais ils tiraient dessus quand
And
même.
as
But-
as the men from the plane, you know, were having their hands up,
Yes.
even at that same time, the
Surrender.
Germans,
Oui, oui.
as they were surrendering, yes, the Germans continued, you know.
Mais à quelle
firing
occasion
at them.
M. Stephenson a-t-il été blessé? Est-ce que c'est les soldats ou alors est-ce que ça provenait avant
Ils
des
leur ramenaient
tirs
d'abord.
de BCA?
Il y avait des bateaux qui ont donné une voile, je crois, pour mettre le blessé dedans.
Okay, so then, alors, il y avait des bateaux, des canots.
Ben oui, les gens qui étaient à la pêche, quoi.
Ok, donc il y avait des gens qui étaient à la pêche
Oui,
avec un
alors
bateau,
ils ont donné quelque chose pour mettre le blessé.
et ils sont arrivés
Et,
avec
c'est
leur bateau près
et
de
il n'a pas
l'avion.
voulu, le blessé n'a pas voulu être... il y en avait qui voulaient l'emmener, les Allemands qui voulaient le porter, mais il n'a pas voulu, il a refusé. C'est ses copains qui l'ont emmené.
Okay.
Ça, je me souviens encore.
So at that time there were fishermen in their boats, and they went towards the plane, and they offered a sail. You know the sail. Sail from their boat to put the injured man on that sail. And but this man, the injured man, refused to be taken away by the Germans. And
Following Mademoiselle Glory's description of the events of July 4th, 1943, I put the camcorder down and called my brother on my cell phone. The phone had a speaker so Mademoiselle Glory could hear his voice. Mademoiselle Glory wept as she listened to the voice of one of the men she saw in the yellow life jacket swim to shore and captured by the Germans 59 years previous. It seemed to be closure for her after a terrifying event in her early youth during the German occupation. Dr. Giroux then took us to the beach area where Mr. Gorbejeau described how the plane came down and showed us the location where it crashed in the water. It was high tide, so none of the plane was visible. It was a memorable experience for my wife and me to stand there on the beach and imagine the events of July 4th, 1943, and the fear experienced by Mademoiselle Glory. Lieutenant Stephenson passed away March 8, 2005, nearly 7 months after relating this story. He was the last of the members of the crew of the Battling Bastards. Lieutenant Stephenson often spoke of the French people and how they must have suffered under the Nazi occupation and the terrible bombing of the Allied planes. On behalf of the Stephenson family, we hope this story will add to the many other stories of that time so that we never forget the ravages of war.